Hello and welcome to part two of this week's hurling show. We've already done a show looking at the qualifiers, the Joe McDonough, Christy Ring and Nicky Rackard competitions. So now we're going to look at the provincial finals here, Michael Verney, brought to you by eFrontiers. Go to e-frontiers.com. They're the recruitment specialists. And if you want to get your CV in, send it into our game at e-frontiers.com. The provincial, there's so much hurling going on this week. But the provincial finals, they're fairly tasty. Kilkenny against Galway and Waterford against Limerick.
Yeah, they are. I suppose they've probably been overshadowed a small bit just because it's Tip and Cork and probably Davy versus Loan. So it's kind of in the shade a small bit. But it's the way the games are at the moment now, you're literally just looking at the next game. You know it's cliched when the players say we're only looking at the next game. But literally you probably won't be thinking of the Leinster final until the other two games are over Saturday and your ass groove is nice and ready on the couch and you're ready to look at the next kind of next game. And then once that's over, obviously most of the hurling will be over for the weekend and everything will be geared towards the Munster final on Sunday. Lots of interesting subplots within the two finals as well, which we'll go through, I'm sure.
Yeah, without doubt. And for anyone who's been living under a rock, just to remind you of the results so far, Kilkenny 320, Dublin 222, having been 16 points ahead, they go and lose that before eventually getting late scores through Alan Murphy and Hugh Lawler to see it over the line. Galway beat Wexford by 127 to 17 points, Canning with 9 points. Brian Cannon 1-4 and Conor Whelan with 4 points among other scorers. So let's start off with Galway against Kilkenny and ask the question, do Kilkenny fear Galway? Now we'll give a quote from Davy Burke, who's obviously a long-time star for Galway. From 2018 he said, "I think they were a monkey on the back for every team in the country. I think they drove everyone in the country mad really for a while. They were kind of this unbeatable team. But I think we changed that in 2012. Obviously, for those who forget, they hammered Kilkenny in the Leinster final and did ultimately lose the All-Ireland final to Kilkenny, and made them look like their good team was coming to a bit of an end. They still fear us in a way, I think, anyway. They still fear playing Galway. Obviously, we've played them since. We've pushed them a lot along the way. A lot of their motivation was probably to try and stop us, really. If you look at it from that point of view, you can take a lot of positives out of it. What do you make of that?"
Yeah, it was interesting because a week later, Kilkenny absolutely gave it to Galway in a kind of a real arm wrestling in Croke Park and ended up drawing 18 points apiece before Galway won a week later. And Kilkenny actually played their part in Galway probably not being at their best and not being able to retain Liam McCarthy because they forced him into another game. But historically, if you go down through it, and even like if you go down through Brian Cody's record, like 2001, 2005, 2012, and obviously their last couple of meetings, they haven't been able to get one over on Galway. We talked about styles making fights and styles making matches before. Kilkenny just haven't matched up that well to Galway. Probably one of the reasons is Galway obviously have been unbelievably talented, particularly over the last 20 years. They're also generally big physical brutes as well, and they're able to put it up. They were able to put it up to that Kilkenny team, with the likes of Eugene Cloonan, Richie Murray, even David Tierney midfield. They had lots of big, athletic, strong, physical players, and that's probably one of the reasons they were maybe they had a bit of a hoodoo over Kilkenny, even when Galway weren't like. It didn't look like they were going to win All-Irelands every year, but yet they were able to beat Kilkenny on a given day, some days. Do they fear them now? There was probably, remember the Salt Hill game in 18 when Galway won quite convincingly?
Yeah, 122 to 211.
Yeah, it kind of looked like Galway were after pushing on and Kilkenny were after regressing. I'd say that's probably much closer now, but do they fear them? I wouldn't say they fear them. There's a part of, within a player, and David Burke and other counties, lads within other counties be the same. When a team has had, the strong hand over you for a long time, sometimes you have to put that out there. You actually have to, we're better than them now. They fear us now. And it's almost like a psychological barrier that you've overcome. Would he have said that if it was a team where, they were beating them one day and they were beating them the next day and this kind of thing? I don't think he would have had. They had such a psychological kind of thing over them for so long. I think he maybe felt that he had to put it out there. But he nearly got his comeuppance maybe a week or 10 days after he said those comments. But I don't think Kilkenny fear Galway now. But I think they'd always be very wary of them and on guard with them because that they can produce brilliance on a given day.
You mentioned Eugene Cloonan there, and it'd be remiss not to tell people who don't already know that he's after taking over Greg Ballycallan in Kilkenny, which of course is ironic because he was part of that Athenry team that beat them in the All-Ireland club final. So that's kind of inviting the boogeyman to dinner, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and he there's that famous one I always talk about, great scores that were got, where he got that point. He collided with was it a goal or a point? I'm not sure. He collided with the Greg Ballycannon full back, and they both lost their hurls. And Eugene Cloonan picked up the hurl that was closest to him, and ended up, I don't know whether he put the ball over the bar or he put the ball in the net with his opposition player's hurl, and then handed him back the hurl. So yeah, I'd say Greg Ballycannon have some. There's some probably bad enough memories of Eugene Cloonan, but they'll be hoping that he's able to steer them to success on the sideline. But yeah, an interesting, like, he was obviously involved with Cunningham in Galway as well, so he obviously is a good coaching pedigree. I've heard good things about him as a coach as well. But Eugene Cloonan was the sort of player that inflicted a lot of pain on Galway. Obviously, Niall Healy would be one that stands out as well with that hat-trick of goals in 05. But they were always able to deliver against Kilkenny. They mightn't deliver the next day or the day before that, but they were always able to generally produce a good performance against Kilkenny.
Yeah, and Aaron Gillan, of course, handing the hurley back to Ronan Maher there, and that's kind of similar in a sense. And actually, Damien Hayes against Cork in, was it 2011? Someone might remind us out there, get the comments in, when he ended up going away celebrating a goal down in the Gaelic grounds in Limerick, I think, and he actually had two hurleys in his hand running off celebrating his man and someone else's, or his own hurley as well. So just the last couple of games in the championship, Kilkenny at 222, Galway 320 last year. That was the famous game where Kilkenny had 13 men, but Galway won in Nolan Park. I think it was the first time they lost down there in Donkey's years, several decades in the championship. And Conor Whelan was brilliant that day. Cathal Mannion was brilliant. 2018, you mentioned that game already. Galway won handily enough out in Salt Hill. And then 2016.
They played three times in 18, of course.
Yeah.
They drew 18 points apiece in the Leinster final. Galway got a couple of goals when they played. Remember when the Leinster final was played in Thurles the week after, and then they'd beaten them in Salt Hill already that year as well.
Yeah, and even going back then to 2016, Kilkenny beat Galway 126 to 22 points. I think that was the game where Richie Hogan came on at half time, might have scored points and turned 5 points and turned the game. But in a wider sense, Galway have won 3 of the last 4 championship meetings, drawn the other. So they're very much like they have the whip hand at the moment. And it's hard not to go along with Galway winning this game, because they do have so many threats across the field. And if you're going to say which team has more holes in it, or question marks about it, or maybe carrying 1 or 2 players even. Most teams are carrying 1 or 2 players. Maybe Limerick are the exception, and Galway might be the other exception.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say about that is that we're probably basing everything we think about not everything we think about Galway, but what we think about this current team, we're basing it on one game where there was, Wexford's performance is nearly too bad to be true. Plus they had, like, Shane Cooney came in for his championship start and was playing in a defence where there was an extra defender hovering around the defence. I think things will be an awful lot different against Kilkenny. I'm not saying, and I've never said that Kilkenny plays 6 orthodox forwards, but they will definitely have 2 to 3 lads in close to the goal. There won't be any sweeper in the Galway defence. Lads maybe had a bit of a luxury last day. I think they'll be taking on an awful lot more. I think a lot more questions will be asked of Galway on Saturday evening than was asked against Wexford. And I think we'll learn an awful lot more about Galway. Are Galway All-Ireland contenders? Of course they are. They were always All-Ireland contenders, despite what people might say. But I think we'll learn an awful lot more about them. And, like, I wouldn't just be basing what we're thinking on Galway just on that game against Wexford. Because
I'm not. I'm basing it on some of the things I saw in the league. The loss to Limerick was very comprehensive. But other than that, the way they came back against Tipperary, some of the signs we saw against Cork, I wouldn't be thinking it's just based on one victory alone. But you can't ignore the manner of that. It's not like Galway had a game a week before Wexford or vice versa or anything like that. There were no excuses. It was just 2 teams went out and 1 team came up out of the pit, and it was clearly Galway, and they just looked like a well-oiled machine.
But what I will say about this is, right, there was a load of lads that I thought questions would be asked of the last day, and they weren't asked. We'll just say Éanna Murphy in goals, a new goalkeeper making his championship debut. He had no questions to answer, really. Sean Loftus at cornerback. Shane Cooney was named at wing back, came in, kind of drop back cornerback. Fintan Burke wing back as well. A lot of kind of new faces. Even Brian Concannon in the forward line, not a new face, but I think all those guys will be asked an awful lot more questions against Kilkenny than they were the last day, and how they respond to that will be interesting. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if TJ was in at the edge of the square, in on top of Éanna Murphy, and they'll lob a few high balls in, or Wally's in at the edge of the square. They'll definitely try to make a lot of these new faces uncomfortable. Only just thinking as well, Could TJ land in corner forward and Sean Loftus, could he start there? Conceivably so. Could Wally be thrown in on top of him? A big physical presence in on top of him? Conceivably so as well. So I just think Kilkenny will ask a lot of different questions of them that weren't asked the last day, and we'll learn a lot more about them. We know what we're going to get out of Mannions, Canning, Conor Whelan and these lads. It's just the new faces. Every team, as you say, probably has some holes in them. The last day it looked like Galway didn't have any holes, but I think they'll be pierced a small bit, and we'll learn a bit more about them on Saturday evening.
Yeah, who wins the battle around the middle eight? If Pádraig Mannion is now gone to midfield, and I mean, this is moving it on again. There's obviously the middle eight battle because that sets the tone for everything else. But let's say Colin Fennelly and TJ Reid go into the inside line. How do Galway deal with that? Do they leave Gearóid McInerney back there? Do they bring Sean Loftus out and drop somebody else back in? Will Fintan Burke be fit? Will Daithí Burke be fit? If those two are fit, I think they're very, very flexible, Galway in the back line. After that, you take a couple of key players out of any team and they're in a little bit of bother. But I wonder, do they want to keep Pádraig Mannion in midfield no matter what, or are they thinking he's now a movable feast? And it didn't work full back against Seamus Callan 5 years ago, but this lad has probably been arguably the top half back in the country in the 4 or 5 years since. So we now think that he can go back and mark TJ Reid in any position, or he can mark Colin Fennelly. I'm not saying he'd win the battle, but he can hold his own with these sort of players. So do you see that fluidity and flexibility in that Galway team, or do you think that they're going to set up as we saw the last day, which is Éanna Murphy in goals, Loftus, McInerney, Cooney, Fintan Burke, Joseph Cooney, Aidan Hart, Pádraig Mannion, Johnny Cohen. Now, and obviously we've to include whether Daithí Burke and Fintan Burke will be fit within that. But in a general sense, do you think there's a sort of a movable feast there?
I wouldn't see Pádraig Mannion go back into the full back line or anything like that, being honest with you. I think the fact that they're after dropping one of their best half forwards back into the defence would suggest that, you know, he's going to be, they're planning on, say, Joseph Cooney being a mainstay of that defence. I don't know, like Aidan Hart or maybe Loftus are probably the two that would come out to midfield if Pádraig Mannion was moving back in.
But the flip side is, one flip side is though, like Dublin found out, if you don't mark TJ Reid, you're going to end up giving yourself an insurmountable deficit to claw back. So one thing is sure, Shane O'Neill has to plan for TJ Reid. And, you know, within what you're talking about there, can you kind of come to that point? How will he go after TJ Reid?
I know what you mean, because if he starts centre forward, that's probably not an issue. Joseph Cooney will probably pick him up. If he goes to the wing, Fintan Burke will probably pick him up. If he goes full forward, McInerney will probably pick him up. Or if Daithí Burke is playing, he'll pick him up. I think that's why I think Kilkenny will try to make them uncomfortable. Possibly, it's a big shift. Like if TJ starts, just say TJ starts full forward on, we'll just say Gearóid McInerney. Are you saying that if they went to a two-man full forward and he went to the corner, that they would possibly drop back Pádraig Mannion on him, or Pádraig Mannion would possibly pick him up wherever he goes?
I'm thinking, how will they project this sort of thing? How will they look at this? And also, like if Fintan Burke is fit and he ended up full back on Colin Fennelly, we found out from the All-Ireland Club final a couple of years ago that that's not something that would probably go particularly well for Galway. Now, within the context of that, St. Thomas's were getting overwhelmed, so it was the toughest possible scenario for Fintan Burke. But that's how Kilkenny try to play. They try and isolate Colin Fennelly, truck the ball into him, and he'll turn and go at you. So obviously he's very devastating in that sort of a sense. I think that's one of the big question marks for Galway if they don't have Daithí Burke available. Like I think you always want to keep your 3 at number 3 and your 6 at number 6 if you can at all, and obviously pick matchups within that. But if they could have Daithí Burke fit and available for full back, I don't think they'd mind who's in there on him. After that, it's just the rest of the pieces.
The question on Daithí Burke as well is with probably a lack of match fitness. I know he's a bit of a freak of nature, but a lack of match fitness, I think they'd be happy with how their back 6 and even their back 9 went the last day. Who would lose out if he were to come in? It's all grand saying Daithí Burke comes in, full back. Gearóid McInerney goes where? Maybe Gearóid McInerney goes wing back and Aidan Hart goes corner back, and either Cooney or Loftus lose out. That could possibly be it too. But I don't think they'll start Burke, to be honest with you. I think he'll be on it. It looks like he's going to be fit to be on the 26th, but I don't think he'll start. I think they'll go what they had. Remember, they went the whole way throughout the league without him as well. So they're reasonably settled without him, and I think he'll maybe only come in for maybe an All-Ireland semi-final, or he could come in during the game if they're having problems. But as you say, dealing with TJ, like, you'd just be foolish not to just basically try and nail him, particularly after last year's game at Nolan Park, when it didn't look like anyone was picking him up specifically, and he was just roaming around everywhere, and he absolutely went to town. I think it was 9 puckouts he caught, and one of the great performances in a losing performance. So they will go after him. I'm not sure with who. If he's in the half line, possibly Pádraig Mannion, and Aidan Hart is probably another movable feast there. He can play probably 2, 4, 5, 7, or 8 or 9,
or sweeper.
So maybe or sweeper as well, so he can come out as well. It's so important to have that flexibility. But with regards, like, do they want TJ on Gerard McInerney in a 2-man full forward line? Probably not. So I think Mannion maybe possibly wouldn't be that surprised. Aidan Hart as man marked before. Physically, I'm not sure if he matches up that well to TJ, because TJ is, that's why we say like a Matt O'Hanlon picks up a TJ or a Joe Canning, because he's so physically big and able to stick with these lads. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do, but they're definitely going to have a specific plan for them. More than Tony Kelly with Clare. If you stop TJ, you're stopping an awful lot of what's good about Kilkenny, and you're giving yourself a really realistic chance to win the game.
Yeah, there was lots of that Kilkenny performance in the first half to admire, but the question remains, was it a case of Dublin and them rejigging their team and finding their form, and that would trouble Kilkenny, or was it a case that Kilkenny switched off? And obviously I've done pieces with Adrian Ronan and also Michael Rice, and you can check them out for their thoughts. But do you expect Brian Cody to change around his team a lot from the previous day? Because there was a couple of experienced guys on the bench, a couple of lads who came on, like Richie Hogan came on, probably had a couple of very bad wides. Martin Keown came on, Joey Holan came on. Like, do we expect to see some changes in this Kilkenny team, and anything dramatic?
Well, Brian Cody said after he didn't know what way to basically assess the performance. Was he basing it on the first half, which was brilliant? Was he basing it on the second half, which was atrocious?
And he's no further down the line. There's no, like, I've thought about it since. I still don't know. I mean, I suspect that Dublin actually picking the team the way it should be picked, putting in a sweeper and putting scoring forwards was the thing, but there has to be an element of switching off too.
I don't think Brian Cody is the sort of lad that doesn't take that second half as a warning sign. At the end of the day, it maybe sounds a bit stupid, but you are only as good as your last, and their last half was very, very poor. I'd be, from what I'm hearing from A versus B games and what might happen, the team, it would probably be something like, I'd say Kieran Wallace is going to lose out and Joey Holden will come back in. By all accounts, he was going to start anyway before he picked up a shoulder injury, maybe a week or 10 days out before the game. I'd say Killian Buckley will slip into centre back with Paddy Deegan and Pádraig Walsh in the two wings. I just think he's probably even more comfortable in the centre than he is on the wing, and I think we've said it before, I think he's a much better half-back than he is a midfielder. I think Richie Reid might lose out in midfield, and I think they might bring in someone like a Connor Brown, who's a big physical presence. Again, he's a bit raw, and we've seen him before in the All-Ireland semi-final and even the final last year, throwing up balls and getting blocked down. But if there's a man-marking job or a stopping job, which if Pádraig Mannion was out midfield, he'd probably be physically well matched to him.
Yeah, and he did well on Keane Lynch last year. But he did come in against Dublin and missed an easy point in front of the goals. I know that's not why he'd be brought in the next day, but every score is going to be valuable for Kilkenny here, because I think they're probably, like, if you were to go with a handicap a spread, like, they're a point or two behind Galway here, maybe even slightly more, so they're going to need to take every chance. And even that Killian Buckley point, he's kind of been moved around an awful lot because he's a versatile athletic player. They put him in a lot of different positions. I'm not 100% sure if centre-back is the best position for him, or if Kilkenny are at their best with him at centre-back. And maybe that's the thing. I don't know if they have the sort of totemic centre-back that kind of brings them up to the very, like, the All-Ireland challenger level. Like, they will be in the mix, don't get me wrong, but I mean to actually win the thing. Whereas with Galway the last couple of years, whether Pádraig Mannion has played there, Gerard McInerney, or even Joseph Cooney now, he looks, he's the size profile, he's got the speed, he's got the power, he's got the hurling. Killian Buckley has a lot of those things too, but I'm not sure if that's the right fit there.
Yeah, no, I think they're probably they're going with what they feel is best. It's not necessarily maybe, that big lording centre back, but I think I would much prefer to see him there than I would with Paddy Deegan. I think it frees up Paddy Deegan on the wing. I think he's a much better wing back. I think centre back is a lot to do with positioning, and I think Buckley is a good, better reader of the game, I would say, and will pick up better positions.
But why has Brian Cody not been able to settle on a centre back for the last few years? He keeps moving them around, whether it's Pádraig Walsh, Killian Buckley, whoever it might be.
Well, to be honest with you, Shane, if Killian Buckley hadn't been injured for 2019, I think he would have stayed centre back. And even in 2018, he was getting injections to play the Leinster final and even the All Ireland quarter final against Limerick. Like basically because he would have been the consistent centre back if he had been fit. That's my view on it, and I'd say that's if he does go back in centre back on Saturday evening, I'd say that would suggest that Cody had him kind of nailed down for that spot and it's kind of been easing him back into it. As regards up the pitch, this could be absolute baller dash, but I believe in an A versus B game either in the last 10 days that Colin Fennelly wasn't playing on the 18, so maybe there's a possibility that he won't play. I'd be amazed if he didn't start. As regards the other forwards, you're probably looking at Owen Cody will probably be out around the half line again. Walter Walsh, Billy Ryan, I believe, is injured or has some sort of a knock and might be a doubt. So there's talk of Richie Latty coming into the full forward line and possibly even maybe drifting out the pitch. He'd be more comfortable out the pitch, either half forward or midfield. And as regards where TJ will play, TJ could easily go inside, and I wouldn't be one bit surprised if they horsed him in on top of Sean Loftus. Like he went in, they kind of shuffled the deck the last day. What were Dublin preparing for? They were preparing for TJ centre forward. All of a sudden he's in a full forward, and it's just a different kind of a dynamic to their Titan team. And you had Colin in the corner, so I am expecting a decent handful of changes. I think Brian Cody has gotten his scare, and he's going to take that scare as rather than actually losing the game and have been forced to make changes as a result, he's going to make changes on the back of that second half performance.
Yeah, it's a dangerous one for Galway in that sense, because everyone is talking them up now because of the manner of their performance against Wexford, and plenty of people are talking Kilkenny down. And I mean, it would be just the third time in their history that they've gone 4 years without a Leinster championship if they don't win this game, and that would be pretty much a bit of a big deal. I mean, since Galway have come into the championship, they've really lifted up the Leinster championship. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And maybe it's frustrating for your own county that Offaly aren't there, and the likes of Galway, who aren't a native Leinster team, are in there. But they've definitely been a huge part in lifting up that championship without a doubt. Now Galway kind of got it, in some respects you could say they had it handy at the back against Wexford because they had a sweeper the whole game. That's definitely not going to happen here. They'll play the six forwards, they'll have lads closer to goal. So will that backline be able to resist them? But then up at the other end, who can mark Conor Whelan? Like he was the reason that Paul Murphy's fouls last year ended up, I think it was because he was certainly one of them fouling Conor Whelan. They find it very difficult to handle him. Most lads find it difficult to handle him. In a one-on-one situation, I'm not sure anyone's going to be able to take him one-on-one in the backline. Maybe Dahi Burke, who happens to be on his own team, is able to do it in training, and maybe Mike Casey could do it. But it's very hard to make a case for too many lads being able to keep into Conor Whelan. And if he's got space and if he's got early ball in, I don't know who in that Kilkenny backline is able to live with him.
No, it's going to be difficult, Jay. You're kind of limiting the damage, aren't you, really? You're just trying to make sure that, I suppose you're trying to limit the supply coming in, make it a bit more to kind of dirty ball coming in. You don't want that ball in front of them, like we talked about before, like the half forward line and the full forward line for Kilkenny they will either save or kind of break the Kilkenny defenders. I'd expect Joey Holden to pick up Brian Concannon. Concannon is bulked up a good bit, but like he shouldn't definitely wouldn't physically overall Holden to be able to handle him, and we've seen how effective he's been in those kind of man marking roles before. You're probably looking at Hugh Lawler and picking up Whelan. Obviously he's a big rangy kind of a player too. They also would have probably Conor Delaney's going to be in around the defence as well, so if there's a problem with Whelan, Conor Delaney's another fella maybe that could slip in there. I just think it's all about kind of limiting the damage. Like the ball and the space that Wexford had coming into their full back line, like the boys were hung out to dry in there even though there was a sweeper. Galway played really, really smart, worked it to a decent position, played a lovely diagonal ball over the sweeper into space. Don't see Kilkenny will try and flood that defence, more kind of like what they did against Cork last year in the first half when they were under pressure, and they'll just try and limit the damage of those guys inside. Of the other players there, like Cathal Mannion was quiet the last day. We saw last year when they played, he could easily pop up with 6 or 7 from play, no problem too. So there's probably 2 or 3 lads in particular in that forward line that really need to be earmarked for really, really kind of tight man marking jobs, and it'll be interesting to see who picks up who But Hugh Lawler on wheeling, Hugh Lawler has, like, he's not been outstanding on some of the big players he's played against, but he's more than held his own as well.
Yeah.
So I'd say he's the most likely to pick up wheeling, and obviously it's a direct match between full back and full forward.
I will say there's good flexibility in that Kilkenny defence, because even if you throw Joey Holden into the team, he's played anywhere in the backs really. Hugh Lawler, I'm sure he can play a little bit further outfield. Obviously, he's going to stay in the full back line. Conor Delaney has both been in the half back line and the full back line. Killian Buckley has probably played most positions, as has Paddy Deegan. He started out as a cornerback, and Pádraig Walsh has played probably every position from 2 up to 12. So there's great flexibility back there. They definitely have that. And even Conor Fogarty at midfield, he can probably do a job backwards. And then Conor Brown, if he's midfield, he played cornerback in the league. He played in the forwards for James Stephens. So that's one thing you'd have to say about Kilkenny. They have great flexibility.
Just on that, Shane, as well, Fogarty's job is huge. Fogarty's job in possibly allowing Buckley to sit back in front of the full back line and deny space is huge. He does a lot of the really, really unglamorous kind of work. He does all the real selfless, unnoticed kind of stuff. He'll be the one in kind of breaking up kind of tackles, a few kind of turnovers and things like that. It's all the unglamorous stuff. He's probably not going to hit 3 or 4 points from play, but he'll do a lot of the stuff that's needed to make his backline look an awful lot better.
Yeah,
so he's crucial.
And then the flip side is, do they match up well with those Galway forwards? So, like, I think Conor Whelan and Brian Kincannon and Jason Flynn, if they all play on the inside, that's a bit of a match-up nightmare for Kilkenny, because on the outside, you also have to look after TJ Reid and Conor Cooney and Colin Mannion, and every one of them can swap around, and that's where Kilkenny will need that versatility. But I don't know, I think there's a bit of a, like, the thing that really works for Galway here is pretty much all of those forwards are fairly fast or are very good direct runners when they have it. And so they're fast and they're strong. And I think that the size profile that Galway can get some joy there. And I just don't think that they have the players to live with Conor Whelan for 70 minutes. And Brian Kincannon, who knows, maybe he'll get shut out in this Leinster final. But the way he's been playing and the way he showed up in the league against Tipperary, especially the way he showed up, 1-4, under lights at Croke Park, the entire country watching, didn't seem to bother him either. You've mentioned Cathal Mannion already. He could pop up with several points. Jason Flynn last year at Nolan Park, he did a couple of things that, they were woeful mistakes or misses or whatever it was. I'm just trying to remember exactly what they were. But I remember that he made some mistakes, but he kept going and he set up a couple of goals. And that was a good sign of him, because he's a player who gets questioned. We both know that. I think most people know that he gets questioned at times. But he's still 6'2" and pacey and can score. Like Conor Whelan can go in full forward as well. And one of the features of the league was that at times Conor Whelan played inside and then he'd go out centre forward, and he kept the team moving around. And if Hugh Lawler is getting turned by Ronan Hayes as he did in the last game for a goal, Conor Whelan is the next level again, so that's going to be really tough for him. So I just think for those forward matchups, I'll just about edge for Galway here.
Yeah, I'm still unsure about the Wexford game. As I said, they weren't asked any questions. I think they'll be asked an awful lot more questions on Saturday evening. When you go through it there's so many kind of intriguing battles. Will Mannion slip back here? Will Canning go to the inside line? Will Conor Whelan come out? There's so many little chess pieces moving around. Will TJ play inside? Because they're all going to have different plans for different guys, and the other manager is going to try and upset those plans by doing something else. I think it's really, really intriguing. I find it really, really hard to call, I have to say. Find it very, very hard to call. And you know me, Shane, when I'm 50-50,
a Kilkenny man through and through, yeah.
When I'm 50-50 on the fence in a game Kilkenny are playing in, I'm probably always going to stump for Kilkenny.
Actually, you can't deny your blood, like.
Jeez, I tell you what, not bad hurling blood to have.
Okay, do you know what it also is TJ Reid against Joe Canning, a battle of the social media giants. So it kind of occurred to me just before we were recording here to see what sort of following do these guys have between Twitter and Instagram. So started off with Joe Canning. Between both of them, 125,900 followers approximately. That is serious going. Who do you think is next in the line of top hurlers? So we just went through all the top Liam McCarthy counties just to see guys who have 10,000 or more. Now there's probably a couple missing there, and you can comment to us. But I just picked one player from each county.
Twitter and Instagram.
Twitter and Instagram combined, yeah.
I'd say Keane Lynch should be fairly active on Instagram. I'd say he's kind of quirky and out there. I'd say he'd be high up enough.
He's number 6.
Okay. Lee Chin will be high enough on Instagram.
He's number two. He's number two, just shy of 55,000. So Canning is off in his own stratosphere when it comes to social media following.
Who else? Number 3 and 4. Tony Kelly, no.
He's actually number 8. He's well down the list. Yeah, 11,737. So not as active on social media. I think the likes of Joe Canning would use it an awful lot for product promotion and business promotion, that sort of stuff. Lee Chin would definitely do a lot of that. TJ Reid, especially with his gym and stuff like that. TJ Reid is third with 46,300. Next, James Callan with 39,700. Then Austin Gleeson, 36,900. Keane Lynch, as I said, just shy of 30,000. Patrick Horgan, 19,000, and then Tony Kelly, 11,737. But you came out with a good question there, and I'll throw it at you. If you could go back into the olden days, all these players who were big mouthpieces and what have you, back in the days before social media, who would have had the biggest following?
There's some absolute doozies there now, I'd say. Like without being smart, what would you give to be getting content from Johnny Pilkington in the days after a big Offaly win? Or even the night before an Offaly match where he could be going for a couple of pints down in his local, and where he could be, making comments about Babs on social media, like the comments he made, and even how Babs ended up being kind of booted out after the Leinster final. Maybe those comments would be made on social media if he was a player now, I don't know.
Like Babs would be an absolute beauty on social media, and somebody down there in Ardfinnan, will you sign him up, because he'd be unreal. Do you know what else occurred to me there as we were talking? I was thinking about how some of the players now, and Joe Canning had a certain drink being promoted after a big game against Clare a couple of years ago, a photo in the dressing room with the drink. I was then thinking, what if it was like Bobby Ryan, who was captain of Tipperary in 1989, and he was doing these ads for this product that used to dose cattle with, and get rid of fluke and mastitis and all this kind of stuff. And
does your cow have dry cow mastitis?
Yeah, and then he's there doing the product placement from the dressing room afterwards, himself and a few of the other boys, Aidan Ryan, his brother, and Nicky English, all smiling and all. But get your comments in. Let us know who else you think would have a huge following. Gerlach Nan.
Gerlach Nan, Gerlach Nan, videos of him out hunting and doing all sorts of mad, crazy stuff. I think Jerry McInerney would be fierce interesting as well, just because he was such an icon with the white boots and the moustache. Of recent years, even we obviously saw when Guido won the Ulster club title, Kevin Cassidy and the boys would be fair crack, and even if he was playing with Donegal now, I know Jim McGuinness didn't let them have the phones or anything like that. That would definitely be interesting. And just going back probably a good bit more, Christy Ring was such an icon.
Mick Mackey.
Yeah, imagine the followings that those guys would have. It'd be imagine the whole Twitter world or the social media world would have exploded when that picture of Ring and Mackey kind of chawing at each other in I think it was 1957 Leinster final, when Ring was coming off with the arm in the sling and Mackey was doing umpire. Imagine the interaction or the page views that picture would get now. So some of those guys would definitely have monster followings, I'd say.
That would have been in Munster too, not Leinster. And do you know what?
Imagine Ring putting up wasn't there that great story years ago about he used to try and ring the bell on the parish priest's door by striking a ball off it. If that was now, that would probably be a TikTok video or something. Do you know what I mean?
And what about Jimmy Doyle? He used to get his hurling sharp by playing with his dog. So he'd hit the ball off the wall and it'd come back, and he'd had to try and get it before the dog did. And he would have said, famous Tipperary hurling with the accent. It was the best training partner I ever had. This sort of crack. And then I was thinking even Mick Mackey. There's that famous story of him back in I suppose it was the 40s. Where he was playing for Limerick, and he went through and scored a 5th goal or something like that, but a few lads had hit him a clip on the way through and broke a hurley or two off him, and he came running away apparently going, no Tipperary Ash will ever effing break that, beating his chest on the way out. Can you imagine if that stuff hit social media? So let us know
lastly, anyone from around Offaly or even a couple of clubs in Laois would know well of Paddy Kerwin played with Offaly in the 1981 and learned massive character. He got a famous score to beat Laois in 1980 and got a famous score to win Burrs County final as well. And he'd never be short of an old comment. He kind of talks a bit like that. But if he was on social media now, you could just imagine the comments being fired over and back. Or if those guys were playing now, it'd be comical. I'd say just the type of characters they were and the followings that these guys had, it'd be unbelievable.
Yeah, without doubt. Okay, we'll move on now to the Munster final between Limerick and Waterford down at Semple Stadium Sunday at 4:00. Just looking at the form guide here, Limerick pulverised Tipperary 323 to 217. Aaron Gillan was on fire with 2-6. Seamus Flanagan 1-1. And just in general, a really good team performance. An awful lot of lads got on the score sheet. Whereas Waterford beat Cork 128 to 124. Late Patrick Horgan goal kind of took some of the bad look off it for Galway. Stephen Bennett scored 12 points, all from frees. Callum Lyons came up and scored 1-2. Deise, Hutchinson, Gleeson and Jamie Barron, they scored 3 points apiece. So really good team performance there. And a great start for Liam Cahill as a championship manager. Just some of the recent meetings. Waterford only scored 10 points at home last year against Limerick, 224 to 10 points. It was the mother and father of Baton's, really, and especially in front of your home crowd. You know, and how scrutinised they were. It would have been embarrassing for them. You know, Ozzie Gleeson was scrutinised on the Sunday game. They were holding up his work rate. I thought it was probably really unfair. They kind of came across, you know, that was just so humiliating. But like even 2018, it was Limerick 226, Waterford 116, so 13-point defeat. There's been a couple of heavy clippings in recent times. Now in the league, there was only 4 points in it, 121 to 117. Saying that, Waterford struggled for scores. They only got 1 point from play in the first half, but they kept going, which is a really good sign. But do you think, how much do you think of the build-up to this for Liam Cahill and his players will be around, look at what they did to us last year in our home field in front of our own supporters. We can't let that happen again.
I don't know.
Oh, come on.
I don't know, Shane. No, I genuinely don't know if Liam Cahill would be making any comment on anything that has happened before he came in.
Yeah, but you got to look at what, like, everyone has to have pride in their jersey to win, and you got to find ways to fire lads up. And I know it's not all about beating a newspaper clipping on the wall and all that kind of stuff, but you got to get into lads to get them laser focused. And the idea of letting that happen to you again, you can't let that happen to you again.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the way you're even saying that, I think has negative connotations for even a mind frame. Like, then you're harping back to something bad that has happened to him. He's trying to get over all the last couple of years, the disastrous last couple of years. I genuinely don't think there'll be much comment made about that, because I genuinely think he's only interested in what they are doing now and the body of work that he has done with them. And there's a lot of new players as well. There's a lot of new kind of faces that he's kind of entrusted into the team this year, and basically placed an awful lot of faith in. I understand where you're coming from. I think that's maybe more something from within the players. Whether Liam Cahill is actually saying that or not, I'm not sure. But that basic form of motivation can be used at some stages. I just don't know if Liam Cahill is the type of a lad that would hark back to something that he had no part in, and this is a totally new Waterford setup with a lot of new players.
Yeah, but he can find a way to say it and be like, lads, I looked on, I know you're good hurlers, but to see this happening, you know, you cannot let this happen. We're coming in here, we're going to turn it around. I think you can definitely use something like that, because every team is looking for an edge of some sort, whether it actually counts when you're out on the field. But if it gets the lads laser focused for a couple of weeks in training, I think it's no bad thing. But
yeah, as long as you're saying it in a positive way, it can't be harping back to we were shite last year.
But that goes without saying, you know, that goes without saying. And of course, you're not going to go into a game and tell your team.
It actually doesn't. A lot of people don't realise that. Managers in particular, if you start placing negatives around, you have to put a positive on a negative. A lot of lads will be going, lads, you were terrible here last year, we're not going to let that happen to us again. And a lot of lads already have a negative thing in their head about that. Then you have to kind of spin the positive on it. But I agree, it's a basic form of motivation. I'd say a lot of the Waterford lads, number one this year, the main aim was to try and get a win, and number two was maybe number one was to maybe get a bit of self-respect back into the jersey and self-respect back into themselves, because they've been totally disrespected over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think Liam Cahill is going to be feeling that his team can win this, and I don't see why they, within the camp anyway, we on the outside will probably more than likely be going for Limerick here, because they have been so dominant and they've been putting teams through an awful lot of misery. But that team has changed around an awful lot. There's only 10 of the 20 players that were used in the Munster clash between the teams last year that started against Cork the last day. So there has been a lot of change. To be fair, Pádraig Fanning, who got a lot of criticism last year, he has changed around the team a nice bit, hasn't he? Or he brought through some players.
Yeah, see, now, like, obviously the one season doesn't probably look that well on Pádraig Fanning. They obviously got to a Munster or a league final, and things maybe fell apart a bit after that. The Clare game, they probably could have got a result against Clare in Walsh Park that day, and they didn't. And then they had 3 kind of heavy defeats thereafter. But he blooded an awful lot of lads. He blooded Conor Prunty in a full back. look at him now. We think he's probably one of the best fullbacks in the country and could potentially be, very, very good for the guts of the next decade. Jack Prendergast was blooded in his first year on the county panel. I think he came on against Clare, started the next 3 games. Who else have we got there? Callum Lyons would have been blooded under him as well. So there's a lot of new faces. A lot of the lads that we're going to talk about as potential mainstays for Waterford got their kind of championship bow last year under Fanning. So in fairness, he probably gets a lot of criticism, but that was a big move, and it probably made Liam Cattle's job a lot easier that those guys had come in last year. And to be fair, those 3 guys had played well last year, and they're kind of carrying on that form this year.
And he lowered the blade in that match against Cork for the last one. He was like, I'm going to give a lot of different players a chance. And that probably was important for some of those players. Now, they lost that game ultimately to Cork, but they gave a decent, gutsy performance. And the question is, if things go wrong for Waterford, and we know their quality and the fact that they've been to All-Ireland final just a couple of years ago, won no game since up until the Cork one. But is there a concern here that on the one hand you could have a really competitive performance from Waterford, but on the other hand, if things go wrong, that they could keel over and Limerick could win by a point a man?
I would have less of a worry about that. I just haven't seen them against Cork and haven't seen them throughout the league, and just seen there looks to be an attitude kind of a shift. And they look, to be honest with you, they look an awful lot fitter as well. They look like they're absolutely flying. They look like they're really, really hungry for work everywhere. Like Tyg de Burka, a couple of the balls he burst out at the last day. Lads like Callum Lyons, they obviously have that belief in their physical fitness that they can go herring down the line and that they can take on anybody. There were stages of the Cork game where they were hitting an awful lot of wides, and you're thinking, this could maybe creep into the psyche. They might have missed their chances. Was it 14 wides in the first half?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. No wides in the second half then. So they were able to rectify that. I would have less worry about that. I personally don't see Waterford winning the game, but I see them being very, very competitive and bringing an awful lot of energy to it. And just on something you said there's only 8 of the All-Ireland final team from 2017. Only 8 of them started the last day, and definitely Pádraig Fanning has done a service for Liam Cattle, but Liam Cattle has definitely put his own stamp on things, and there was a couple of lads, there's probably 6 new players that he's really brought in, so he's really trusted a lot of faith in. Conor Prunty will be one, made him vice captain. He's now captain, obviously, because Pádraig Mahony's not there. Callum Lyons, who John Milan compared him to me, he said he's like a Duracell bunny, and he compared him to potentially he could be a hurling's version of Jack McCaffrey. He just says he has that about him, and he thinks he will only improve, which I would have to say myself as well. Jack Fagan is another one who was hovering around panels with Derek McGrath in Derek McGrath's time, but is really taking his chance now. Jack Fagan played for Meath in 2015. He basically up sticks and moved his whole life down to Waterford because he was in college in Carlow. He moved down to Waterford just to basically test himself against hurling's elite. And he had a few hard times and injuries, and maybe it looked like maybe people are saying maybe he might transfer back to Meath, or maybe that could happen. But after a brilliant campaign with Deise, he was called in by Cattle, totally taking his chance. Prendergast is the same, another kind of new face who's flying. Shane McNulty is 26 and is on the panel since 2014, but has only made 7 championship appearances and waited 4 years for his championship debut. He again was another lad that was thrown in last year, and when a lot of lads were sinking, he swam along with the likes of Prunty and Lyons. He's another face the Cattle has gone with. And then probably Deise Hutchinson is like the jewel in the crown. He's a great player to get back. Maybe a player that they never thought they'd get back, having played professional soccer with Brighton and Hove Albion. So there's probably 6 new players, and then obviously Cattle's underage pedigree is absolutely outstanding. And who was Cattle's right-hand man throughout all those successes, the minor 20 and 21, only Mikey Beavens, who went to college in Waterford IT and knows Waterford well, won Fitzgibbon Cups down there. So it's a totally new Waterford with a lot of new faces both on the pitch and on the line. And what you were saying there about would they fold, I just think they're steeled. I think they're a lot more hardened now. That's not to say that Limerick could pull away and win by 8 or 9 points. Limerick could pull away and win by 8 or 9 points against anybody, but I just think this Waterford team will deliver a performance. And I'm expecting a very competitive game for long stages, but I would expect Limerick to, if they're not winning by 3 or 4 throughout, that they'd pull away, maybe win by 6 or 7.
Yeah, it's funny, sometimes you talk about a team like Limerick and it's almost the same way that you preview Dublin when they're playing a football match. You kind of expect this total performance. you're not really too concerned about any weaknesses they might have, because you just feel like that the team itself will overwhelm the opposition, or they'll always find an answer. They're so interchangeable, they're so flexible, and that they have quality all over the field. And that may be the case. And then you end up just looking at the opposition, the team that's the underdog, and thinking, well, where can they find a bit of joy here? And so if I'm going to do that, I would say Limerick didn't mark Tony Kelly the first day out. They didn't have a designated man marker. So will that free up Ozzie Gleeson in a similar fashion if he decides to start as, let's say, a corner forward and drift out? You know, I mean, because obviously there's nice flexibility in that forward line for Waterford. Will he play centre forward, and will Declan Hannon man mark him? I don't think Declan Hannon is going to man mark anyone. I don't necessarily know if Limerick will go after man marking jobs here within reason. They'll obviously have matchups, but will they go after man marking jobs if guys roam? And the Clare game would suggest not. So there could be an opportunity for Austin Gleeson to get into this game and get a lot of scores on the board. He wore number 7 the last day, but he was more operating around centre forward, I suppose you could broadly say he was playing. So can
you know, Shane, he's going to get away 6 or 7 shots in most games.
Yeah, generally. And I want him closer to goal. I keep saying that to you. I'd rather him taking 6 or 7 shots inside the 65 than outside or beyond the 65, the defensive line of the field. I just think it makes more sense. The only thing is, one of his best strengths is getting the ball off the shoulder of somebody else and bursting through, and the further out the field you are, the more opportunities there are to do that. So it's a bit of a balance, but Austin Gleeson probably just, as long as he's working hard and keeps going and looking for the ball here, he can make himself a huge factor. The other thing is that inside line. We know Limerick are without Richie English and Mike Casey, and Tipperary obviously didn't do too much damage up there, and were struggling for scores and struggling for oxygen throughout that game. But can Deise Hutchinson get a bit of joy? Can Stephen Bennett? Jake Dillon will probably drift further out the field. Maybe, obviously they have that flexibility. They can move different lads inside. But if we're to look at Hutchinson and Bennett, I would say Dan Morrissey going on Bennett, and then Sean Finn probably going on Deise Hutchinson, which is a fairly mouth-watering battle to come. But if Hutchinson can get a bit of joy, and if Bennett can get a little bit of joy, maybe there are scores for Waterford to be had, but can they get it in there on the front foot? That is the real trouble.
That's the thing, is trying to break down that kind of impenetrable kind of half back line a lot of the time. So you can just see how Hannon has been brilliant so far, this year. Even just obviously we're only probably based it on one game, but he looks definitely back to himself. Maybe, and he wasn't at different stages of the 2019 season, and he's getting forward, and even he's setting up a lot of attacks. He's scoring points. Dermot Burns is doing the same as well. I do agree with you that they can get some joy possibly with Gleeson if they play him, if they keep him maybe a bit further forward. If he gets clogged into that kind of middle 8 where there's an awful lot of bodies, the game could end up bypassing him. Definitely think inside you can get a bit of joy. I think Sean Finn matches up though really well with Deise Hutchinson. I think he matches up nearly perfectly with him, to be honest.
Well, he's as good a player as there is to go man on man with him. But if you give good ball into Deise Hutchinson and there's space, and if he actually finally has a mind to turn and go at goal rather than turn and look for the point, I think very few lads can keep into him. I think he could get joy off anybody.
I think one of the big problems with Waterford is going to be, why did they get on so much possession the last day? Because Cork lorded ball down on top of Tyke de Borca. I don't know. We'll have to get our hands on the stats after. If I was doing an over-under betting, I would say that Tyke de Borca will get this might sound mad. I would say that Tyke de Borca will get possession less than 15 to 16 times in the whole game against Limerick, because they got 15 to 16 possessions in 15 minutes against Cork. But there won't be ball like that coming down. They just will not allow that to happen. And they'll be pulling a centre forward. Hazel will come out, but they could possibly plank Keane Lynch on the 65 again. I wouldn't be that surprised at all, to try and keep the Borca as honest as possible and go through the lines a lot more. But they will not be allowing a lad like that to lord the game. So therefore you're denying Limerick, or I'd say you're denying Waterford a lot of possession. You're denying him that chance to burst out and maybe start attacks. So while the lads inside could potentially do damage, they're going to be operating on even lesser supplies than they were the last day, in my view anyway.
Yeah, Jake Dillon might drop out the field, and you might see Kieran Bennett, who started the 2017 All-Ireland final, in the backs. You might see him drop back, maybe do a man-marking job on someone like Keane Lynch. It's a tall order, but if you can get not just a win against Lynch, if you can even break even with him, much like Kilkenny did with having Conor Brown, and obviously they absolutely crowded the middle area, and maybe that'll be the template for Waterford here. They certainly can't go mano a mano. Nobody can really with Limerick at the moment. They're just too good all over the field.
I think is interesting, Shane, like from a manager's point of view, you must plot and plan so much, particularly when you're coming up against Limerick, like when you're coming up against the Dubs. And after 2 minutes, so many of your plans could be gone out the window. And, Kyle Hayes is wing back and Darragh Donovan's in midfield and Cian Lynch is centre forward. So you can't plan too much for rigid matchups. You can't plan too much for that as well, because you're also giving the opposition a chance to rip up your script.
Yeah, you need a framework though. You need, ideally, we want to keep player A, let's say Conor Prunty at fullback. We want to keep we'll say Tadhg de Burka at centre back, and if at all possible keep those matchups. But if X, Y and Z happen, this is how we'll react to it. We're going to keep Tadhg de Burka as a sweeper no matter what, so we have that security blanket there. But I think Waterford are going to have to crowd that middle area, because and actually just back to, if you can get that win over Cian Lynch or even break even with him, that's a huge thing. If Austin Gleeson plays centre forward, can he get a win on Declan Hannon? Or would he go out onto maybe Kyle Hayes, who hasn't played out there as often? Obviously, he has that under 20 or underage pedigree playing in the backline. But where would you put Austin Gleeson to try and get maximum benefit out of him? I think he probably won't go over on Diarmaid Byrnes. He was unbelievable against Tipperary. But where would you put him to try and get that win against Limerick?
He could potentially go on Diarmaid Byrnes, because the one thing about Diarmaid Byrnes is he will let you hurl, because he's going to do his own amount of hurling. Their halfbacks are more attackers nearly than defenders, in the sense that Burns loves to be on the front foot. I wouldn't be that surprised if Gleeson went over there, because he will get on some ball and you will get a bit of space, and they might try and take him on and put him on the back foot. So I wouldn't be that surprised if he was on Burns, being honest with you. We don't really know who's going to be the other halfback. Paddy O'Loughlin could come in. Darragh Donovan could sit back there as he was named. That's probably unlikely at this stage. But just even like the league meeting earlier on this year, they've had a lot of warning about Gearóid Hegarty. Gearóid Hegarty went to town during the league. He scored 1-5, and it kind of got me thinking his performances at the moment, and even Morrissey and the flexibility of Hayes and damage he can do. As regards like units on a pitch, half backs or half forwards, where do you think the Limerick half forward unit ranks currently in the game, and where do you think it ranks against some of the great units that we've seen over the last maybe 15 or 20 years?
It's up there with anything. I mean, I know it's a little bit interchangeable with Lynch going centre forward the last day and Kyle Hayes moving out, but that trio of, let's say we just consider it's Hayes with Hegarty and Morrissey either side of him, that's up there with anything. Like, they've been so devastating. Their work rate is just unbelievable. They could all score 4 or 5 points in a game, and they've got size, they've speed, they've physicality, they've everything you really need. And then you start thinking of, okay, what are the other great units? That half back line for Kilkenny, Tommy Walsh, Brian Hogan, JJ Delaney. Cork then with Curran, O'Halpine and Gardner. Like, it's probably up there.
Would you just love to see them colliding? It'd be unbelievable, wouldn't it?
Should be great. It was like, when that Waterford half forward line used to battle against that Cork half back line. That was brilliant. Even if you go back to the 80s, Galway would have had a glorious half back line that was much vaunted across the country. McInerney, Finnerty and Kiely. There are some great units, and obviously people get your comments in there and let us know what you think the best unit, the best line on the field has been in the history of GA and currently. Is there a better line on the field now than that half forward line for Limerick? Is much of the tone set for what they do in that half forward line that basically roams absolutely everywhere?
Yeah, no, I think it is. Yeah, it's like they're able to score, they're brilliant on possession, in possession. They're foragers as well.
You could see them all playing centre back for their club, or you could see them all playing both as centre backs or as forwards. They kind of have that hurling and they have that athleticism.
Hayes played full forward in the All-Ireland minor final, and he also played centre back for the under-21s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the flexibility that they bring, and they can bring those defensive instincts into a half forward. Like, what's a half forward now? I don't know. Is he 50-50? Is he 50% defence, 50% attack? Is he 60% defence, 40% attack? But they are able to marry that role brilliantly. And I suppose what really separates them is just how athletic the three of them are. They're so athletic. I'd love to be seeing the GPS stats for the three of them, because the ground they cover is absolutely huge, and like they just make a defender's job so much easier. They make their defender's job so much easier by coming back. And then you have Will O'Donoghue coming back as well. There's so many lads that are just real proper foragers. But the three lads, those three half forwards, are all able to score. Like if they're scoring, like most of the shots they take, they're putting over the bar as well, which is cool. They can kill you both ways. They can kill you with their work rate, and they can kill you on the scoreboard too.
Yeah, and then because of their work rate and their movement, they'll leave space inside for Graham Mulcahy, Aaron Gallan, Peter Casey, Seamus Flanagan if he comes in, David Reid, even Pat Ryan, of course, David Dempsey. I'm naming subs there that would be starting forwards for an awful lot of other counties.
Yeah, and Shane, and they bring that conundrum. Like, they're that good that they're bringing that conundrum. Do we follow them? Like, that's unheard of, to be following half forwards. It would actually be unheard of, because you're basically vacating a whole flank. But that's the question that they make teams think of doing now, because they think, okay, if we man mark, like, you have a case where you could be man marking a half forward line, and you could just end up following them around. But it's in one way it sounds mad. In another way, you're thinking, okay, if we deny the three of them possession, we might have a better chance of winning. Obviously, you're leaving an acre in front of Gallan and the boys inside. But that's the conundrum now. I'd say a lot of things we'll be thinking about, particularly Hegarty in the form he's in. Do we need to put a follower on him? Maybe play a sweeper and put a follower on him and just try and keep him out of the game and keep his possessions down. But they're just phenomenal athletes, phenomenal players. And in order to beat Limerick, I would have always said that's the half back line is the launch pad. But their half forward line is probably their launch pad now. And it's a fair unit.
Do you remember last year when we were looking back at the league final where Limerick won by 7 points against Waterford, and it was that beautiful flicked goal from Aaron Gallan, and his matchup with Conor Prunty, which we expect to see, is going to be very tasty. But one of the things we were talking about was how Waterford didn't know whether to stick or twist in terms of how far up the field do we pressure this Limerick team. So they had decent numbers, let's say between the 45 and 65 against Limerick, who would then do that short hand passing that we see as a feature of their game every day. And you'd have a couple of Limerick lads standing back at midfield in their own 65 in between there. And as Limerick ran the ball out, they'd just knock it way over the top of them. So they either have to press really high up the field or sit really far back the field, and almost play with very few players up at the very top end of the field. You need someone at the square at all times, and it'd be interesting to see, would that be Deise Hutchinson or whoever. But they need to put huge pressure from the 60, or have huge numbers from the 65 on the far side of the field all the way back to their own 21. Because if they leave that space and Limerick can walk out and pick a ball from the 65 or from midfield, and Waterford have these numbers on their own 65 or on their own 45 and they're just getting bypassed, it's going to be good night, Irene.
Yeah, no, it is. There's no point in saying any different. It is going to be like that. And I think Waterford are in a different place this year, and both mentally and physically. And there's a lot more maturity, I think, even with those guys having an extra year under the belt of championship hurling. And those younger players that I named, those new faces, there's a bit of a kind of a chest out kind of a swagger about them as well. So I'm definitely expecting a performance from Waterford, but I think they'll come up short. Haven't won a Munster in 10 years, I think. Their last Munster final was obviously an absolute disaster against Tipperary in 16. But as we said at the start of the year, what's progress for Waterford? Winning a championship match is progress. Another step along that line would be, being really, really competitive with Limerick in a Munster final, and I think they can be very competitive. I think some of the matchups are going to be really interesting. I think Gallan and Prunty in particular is a really interesting matchup. Prunty's your modern day fullback. He's probably 6'2" or 3. He's quick on the turn. He's a good man marker. He's solid in the air. He's fast. He's not going to be done for pace. That's one I'm really, really looking forward to, particularly as all that we mentioned about Limerick, Gallan still offers them that classic out ball of being able to horse the ball into the edge of the square, and he's a great chance of winning it. So they kind of pull everything together. But I do expect Waterford to make them uncomfortable in different areas, particularly if they can get off to a really, really fast start. And the way Waterford had the energy to show the last day, I definitely think they will cause them some trouble.
Yeah, and Limerick are looking to retain the Munster title for the first time since 1981. But as they showed in retaining the league title there recently, that sort of stuff doesn't seem to bother them. So much going on at this game. Shane Dowling was talking in the Limerick Leader about the most impressive thing for me at times was the response every time Tipperary came back. When Tip got a goal, we got one straight away. We responded very well to the illegal goal, obviously the throw ball, well, not the throw, but the pick up from Noel McGrath for John McGrath's goal, and the 3 points at the start of the second half. When Tip brought it back to 6 points, we rallied and responded every time, and that for me was the most impressive. Whereas John Milan on the Throw-In podcast, he was talking about how it's the monkey off the back, and that Waterford were back to their normal selves. So there's an awful lot here. I think Waterford will give a good performance. I do fear that this could be a 10-point loss. I do think there's a chance of that. I would like to see a really competitive game, and I'd like to see Waterford rattling a few goals to really test Limerick. We want a classic game here, but it just feels like there's so few weaknesses. I mean, there's the full backline issues for Limerick, but they don't allow the ball to get in there in the front foot often enough for it to actually, ever materialise. And
yeah, a weakness is only as weak as much as it can be exploited, really, isn't it?
Yeah, like Deise Hutchinson's capable of scoring 1-5, but that's if he gets ball in and there isn't 10 lads around him. Because he's only one man at the end of the day. Austin Gleeson could absolutely kill you. But if he's going to be surrounded, Will O'Donoghue at the front, Declan Hannon to the back, Diarmuid Hannans, or Diarmuid Burns, whoever it is, how can he impact the game the way he wants to? Like Jamie Barron can sidestep, like he could sidestep 10 people in a phone box. But, if there's 12 people there, he's eventually going to run out of road. So that is the problem. And can Tadhg de Búrca have the game he had against Cork? Limerick used the ball so much better. They use space so much better. So I think that it could unfortunately be a 10-point win for Limerick. As in unfortunate because I wanted a competitive game.
Just on what you're saying there, we've obviously talked about the new faces, but crucially, Jamie Barron looked back to his best. Gleeson looks like, he's getting there. De Búrca looks like he's coming back to his best as well. Kevin Moran is still Kevin Moran. So that's, that means you've got a lot of lads playing really, really well. Stephen Bennett's probably someone we haven't mentioned. He can do all the silky things in attack, but he can also be, a really, really good worker and a really good playmaker too. I'm excited about this one. Funnily enough, probably a bit more excited about this than the Leinster final. I'm not sure why. Just maybe because we know what Limerick are going to bring. There's that, you're wondering, can Waterford step up to that level? I think they will be able to step up to some extent, but as you say, I have it just in my head, I'm just thinking it could be something like 125 to 18 or 19 points, and Waterford could maybe struggle to make an impact in the last 5 or 10 minutes when Limerick bring on, Dempsey and David Reid and these sort of lads, and Seamus Flanagan as well. But I am expecting it to be competitive, definitely. And two, when there's so much else on this weekend, the provincial finals are provincial finals, and there's a chance to get hands on silverware. Imagine Waterford did win a Munster title this year, and imagine they beat Limerick. It'd be absolutely huge. It would rock the whole scene. And the only pity for it then for everyone else would be that if Limerick had a chance to go back to the back door and regroup again. But you never know. You just don't know what can happen. That's the excitement about Waterford at the moment.
Well, actually, it would mean that Limerick would have to play 3 games in quick succession to get back to they'd have to play a quarter-final and semi-final in quick enough succession and win both of those games. And obviously the knock-on effect for the teams that are already in the qualifiers, they're like, oh no, Limerick are in here. And it's the same for Kilkenny. Winning here is massive in terms of All-Ireland ambitions. So I don't think you want to go through the back door at this stage. The fewer games you play, the better. It's not like the olden days where you can play 8 games but it's spread out over 4 months. This is rat-a-tat, and one injury in your season is more or less done given how condensed it is. Right, we've it all said, have we?
Yeah, looking forward to it now, yeah. Particularly, we'll be probably burnt out by 8 o'clock on Saturday evening of hurling, but we'll be recovered just in time for Sunday afternoon's final.
Absolutely, and just a reminder, we're brought to you by eFrontiers, the recruitment specialist. Go to e-frontiers.com, or if you want to get your CV in, if you're looking for work, send your CV into our game at e-frontiers.com. Thanks very much, Michael.
Cheers, Shane.